themselves and then to yourselves. But just to contextualise for those who have tuned in, this is a specific hearing to do with the current budget proposals, and we're going to be asking you some questions in relation to your budget for this and the next few years of the plan for the External Relations Department. So I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Deputy Max Andrews. I am a panel member.
Deputy Karen Wilson, Vice Chair of the panel.
Deputy Jeff Sutherland, Member of the panel.
And
Ian Gorst, Minister for External Relations.
Elaine Miller, Assistant Minister, External Relations.
Kate Nutt, Chief Officer, External Relations.
And Richard Corrigan, Chief Officer, Department for the Economy.
Thank you. Do you need to introduce anyone else? Is that all fine for now?
That's why we have a member of the public with us, Chair.
Okay, I wasn't sure. And we won't ask him to introduce himself then, because he doesn't need to. But welcome as well. It's nice to have a real person in the room, a real punter, so to speak. We know that there's some listening in the ether as well. Thank you. So, well, again, thank you for coming in today. We appreciate your time. We know it's a busy time for everyone. The first question is really just a general one. So, from an external relations and financial services perspective, could we maybe ask for your overview in it very briefly of what you think this budget is doing at a high level, and perhaps also what influence you've had in inputting into this budget from your department's point of view?
Well, I suppose if we take the first bit first, I think there's probably been about 10 ministerial workshops seeking to deliver a balanced budget. This is a budget from our perspective which largely maintains the work that we've been doing over the last number of years, whilst at the same time taking our share of the necessary savings in order to reprioritise to spend on, in effect, health.
Thank you. If I just turn, I suppose, early on during our meeting to look at what your overall budget is. So we've got the figures, of course, for the estimate for 2025 for your department. The total expenditure is 3.7 million.
Just give me the page number, please.
Yeah, sorry, of course, it's page 38 on the annex. And the first question is just to compare that to this year. So in terms of what you've had as your baseline for 2024 compared to what is projected for next year, can you talk to us about what the difference is there? Because I don't have the 24 figure to hand.
Okay. So the 24 figure was 3558. This is the external relations budget, not the FS budget, just to be clear on that. And the proposed budget subject to states agreement is 3407. The 24 budget includes the pay awards of 181. The opening 2025 budget includes those pay awards and non-staff inflation of 20,000. There's also been some ins and outs. In effect, we've taken, like all departments, for growth monies from 2024 that were included, we took a 20% reduction there. Overall, we've got savings in there of 79. So that's, and then no doubt we'll talk about how we're going to deliver those.
That's fine. Thanks for that. I think we'll look at some of those figures in more detail as we go along, but I think it's helpful to have them early on just to give the context. And if we do look at financial services whilst we're here, so on page 43 of the annex, we've got a net revenue expenditure figure of 10.8 million, which is also the total expenditure. So there's no income revenue from financial services for your department. And how does that compare to this year, for the baseline Do you have that?
I don't, Richard, I don't know if you got it with you. I don't have the 24 figure in front of me. But we've obviously done the same. We've taken 20% cuts to any growth numbers. We'll have included the pay awards and also the other reductions that we've been asked to make in the department and in grants.
Thank you. So later, there are obvious questions that arise from that, but they'll come later on. So
Okay, fine.
I'll leave that to probably one of my colleagues later. I suppose the one thing to remark fairly early on, though, is that the after the well, we've got next year's expenditure in both cases is slightly different, but then we see a flat line for 26, 27 and 28. So there's no growth at all, even in terms of inflation figured in for those budgets. Is that a fair comment?
We remind ourselves that staff inflation gets allocated in the year that it's granted. It doesn't show in the continuing years
For the staff
of
costs,
this budget. Yeah, when it comes to pay awards.
Yeah.
The reality, of course, is that we have a one-year budget that the state is approving, and the other years are simply indicative.
Yeah.
And therefore we can't say at this point what those budgets will actually be moving forward. It depends on the performance of the economy and
And I suppose
spend across other departments.
it's fair to point out that we're in a slightly unusual system. This is a halfway term budget, if you like, and of course the projections for 27 and 28 are not within the gift of this term, are they? But they're best estimates, presumably, and they set a signal of intent for direction of travel. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So just to restate then, I think, so in other words, there's not been any new revenue expenditure under your remit that's forecast for the short term. Can you talk us through the considerations you took as Minister in proposing any other revenue expenditure items which were not taken forward, for example, and whether they were there tough decisions that you had to make, and what were those items that you maybe had to decide not to spend money on this term?
Well, I think it's more really from a globalised perspective of Council of Ministers' decision to prioritise budgets, which meant that those central functions needed to find efficiencies within their budgets as they move forward rather than looking for growth items. Of course, as all ministers they'd like to maintain their budget in real terms, but equally we have to recognise the more island pressure of settling the pay award in the first instance, one of the things that the government wanted to do when it came into office, prioritising the difficulties that health have found themselves in not living within their budget and projecting requirements for growth into the future. The government took the view that it should look for staff savings in roles above grade 11 and should look for savings in the budget of arm's length organisations that it provided budgetary support to.
Has that political reality been a smooth process for you to Council of Ministers to accept? Has there been fairly good cohesion in supporting growth in health and at the expense of other departments?
Well, I've made my case for my department as other ministers have made their case for their departments. I argued to maintain the grant to not only to the ALO within my remit, Jersey Finance Limited, but also those grants across the whole of the economy. We ended up in a position which I think both the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development and myself can live with, we recognise that there will be ultimately implications for the service that's delivered in those organisations through these efficiency targets, but we equally recognise that at this point that is necessary.
Yeah. And so thank you for that answer. I think it was a good general overview. Are there any specifics that you can give us an example of in terms of things that you might have done or wanted to do in this term, but that you've had to sacrifice for the greater
Well,
good?
as I say, the only one I can actually think of that I fought for, but ended up in a compromise position was the grant to Jersey Finance.
Yeah. And what was the difference in that?
Just over 400,000.
Okay. And the last question from me on this section before I hand over, unless of course there are follow-ups. I noticed that of course the lion's share of the budget for the two streams of your department go towards financial services. Has there been any prioritisation or difference in approach in the way you've looked at applying the savings across those two portfolios, or have they both required?
Well, they're two very separate budget lines.
Yeah.
So if we take the financial services budget line, broadly speaking, you've got the majority, which is the grant to Jersey Finance Limited, and we've just discussed the reduction in their grant there and the case that I made but wasn't successful. Then you've got the changes to the departmental settlement as well. What we have done in that departmental settlement is sought to reorganise because we've had changes in personnel and personnel leaving us. We've sought to reorganise and bring the divisions of the financial services policy area together with what was a separate financial crime policy area, bringing them together. And in that bringing together, of course, we are therefore not recruiting to all of the previous positions that were there.
And are there synergies between the two portfolios where they support each other in a more direct way, not just in the abstract? Do you have?
Well, of course there are, because external relations was initially born out of the need to build government-to-government positive relations in markets that we were operating as a jurisdiction, as well as maintaining good relations with the UK, with France, with Brussels. So there are synergies in the work that we do there, because some of the work of the financial services team is supporting JFL in promotional work and government-to-government work and relationships with senior executives in the institutions that are based in Jersey, not just in those Jersey executives, but their global executives as well, which is really important work. So there are synergies there, and that's why it's really important that we work together as a team, even though we're separate teams, and that's what we do.
Thank you. Any questions on this part so far?
No.
Minister, thank you for being in attendance today. The panel obviously notes that there are plans for income and expenditure for the forthcoming year. I just want to know whether there are any indirect benefits, for instance, where we might be negotiating with other states with, say, trade agreements that will be coming to fruition during the calendar year of 2025. And does the Minister believe that there will be indirect benefits in terms of maybe increased tax revenues and benefits to the island that might be contributing to the government's overall revenue?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, there are. Sometimes we see direct and we also see indirect benefits. There are at least 3 agreements which we would hope to bring to fruition during 2025.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what those agreements might be?
I haven't got that information with me, but there's the Ghanaian bit. There's the
That's a good
Go on.
question. Off the
yeah.
top of
We
my
can
head,
get them to
I'll
you.
come back to you.
That we've
Irish
provided them.
Investment Treaty.
Yeah, we've spoken about that.
We've provided those to panel previously.
Of course, they're the entrusted. They're the agreements, of course, we're negotiating ourselves. They're also the negotiations that the UK conducts on our behalf, free trade agreements. Some of those will be coming to conclusion as well by the end of this year and in 2025.
Is that made more difficult because of Brexit? What role does Brexit play in joint negotiations with the UK?
So the three agreements that I was just referring to, they are, as Chief Officer has just said, they are entrusted. So they are dependent on a letter of entrustment from the UK government. So that's not changed post-Brexit. We used that methodology before. The reality is that all of the free trade negotiated agreements have only arisen post-Brexit, because previously all of those free trade arrangements were delivered from Brussels by the EU on behalf of the UK. And therefore we were simply in them to the same extent that we were in the European Union, which, as you know, under Protocol 3 was for goods only. What we are seeking in the new process, which is the post-Brexit process, is to be included not just for goods, but to seek to be included for services as well. As per the mandate that the states in, I can't quite remember which year it was, agreed that mandate.
22, I think it was.
They're in there.
Yeah, that's where I was just going to.
We do have them.
Thank you. Thanks for
right
that
page up.
extra information. I'll pass over to Deputy Wilson for the next lot of questions.
Okay, this might be a bit more simpler than talking about treaties, but Minister, in your letter of the 23rd of September, you kindly wrote down staff costs across the different teams of your External Relations Ministry. Can you please outline the purpose and priorities of these teams? And in particular, we're looking at the DG and admin, global relations, sanctions, UK and EU team, and the international trade unit.
Okay. So, as the easiest one probably is the first one, which is the office of, which is the DG, and we're joined by the DG this morning. And of course, all of the compliance issues that are necessary for any department within government, from budgeting to risk analysis, to making sure that the department is functioning. UK, is that the next? UK team lead on UK government parliamentary and civil service relations. European team are responsible for building and maintaining relations with the EU member states, including the national government relationships in France. As you know, we now have a Paris hot desk. The Assistant Minister, were she here, would tell you about the engagement work that she is doing with Jersey's honorary consulate community, and they also deal with the London Embassy network and support in and outbound visits. The Channel Island Brussels office, which is joint with Jersey, leads on Brussels engagement. So that's the Commission, the Parliament, the permanent representatives, industry bodies and other Brussels-based institutions. The French office, Bihan, is again joint with Guernsey, and it works across government departments to ensure productive and positive relations with stakeholders in Normandy and Brittany across trade, fisheries, immigration, security, emergency planning, and a whole host of cultural issues. the global relations team really engages with the rest of the world engagement, negotiating treaties, attending multinational fora, so OECD, Commonwealth issues, and engagement tends in that regard to relate, as I said earlier, to our economic targets. The treaties which are currently being negotiated and that we hope will come to fruition in 2025 are with Ghana, Bahrain and Kuwait, just to answer your earlier question. The international trade team is really being created out of what was the Brexit team, but it works with the UK government and other CDs in that post-Brexit environment to ensure Jersey's interests are represented in the UK's free trade programme, overseeing and managing our interests in existing multilateral agreements, for example, the WTO. And did we talk about the international compliance team? Sanctions, that's it, sorry. So that we call that the international compliance team or the sanctions team. That runs our sanctions regime, aviation policy and oversight of the Office of the Director of Civil Aviation, and also supports treaty extension to Jersey.
Can I just jump in with a very specific question? In terms of the embassy work that goes on, the diplomatic relations, to what extent is that either supported or duplicated by the bailiff's office? And what's the difference between the work that is undertaken by that department and yours?
Well, some of it you could say is hand in hand, but the hand in hand work is really about inbound visits, where we may need the bailiff to offer a formal invitation. We need to ensure that the bailiff or the deputy bailiff is on island to support that visit and to welcome them and to do all of the introductory those introductory conversations. That is the only place where there is crossover. All of the embassy work in London with nations' embassies or high commissions is undertaken by the External Relations Department.
And if ambassadors or high commissioners visited Jersey, would it be unusual for them not to visit the bailiff or deputy bailiff if they were around?
If they were on island, it would be very unusual for them not to visit. I can't think that there's been a case when they have both been, one or both have been here, that they have not been introduced and spoken to the bailiff.
Who meets the costs of those diplomatic visits? Would it be your department or the bailiffs?
Well, it really is in partnership. So I don't think there's the general rule is I think that the inbound visitor pays for their own flights and officer accommodation. That's right. But the principal will stay hosted by the Lieutenant Governor at Government House. If there are events here during the course of that visit, then I think the majority of that is paid for from our budget.
Yeah, will come from our budget. Of course, if there is a bailiff's dinner or other engagements organised by the bailiff's office, that would come out of their budget. Yeah,
I mean, part of the reason I ask is that I suppose, in one sense, it could be perceived as a hidden subsidy to your department if that department's effectively paying for something. But I don't want to get into that necessarily. But the second thing is maybe they face less scrutiny as a department than other ministerial departments. So I'm just wondering where the lines are drawn on that.
The majority of the costs will be met by us because the programme is led by us and it's managed by us. And the reason the programme's happening in the first place, as the Minister said, is because we're conducting the engagement in London or directly in member states, which builds the relationship in order to facilitate ambassadors or ministers, etc., wanting to come to Jersey. So, the bailiff's portion of the programme is very, very important, but tends to be smaller in the scheme of the overall visit.
And I will ask this now. It's not the direction I was necessarily intending to go in. And sorry, Deputy, for encroaching, but we know that there are. It may well be that there are changes to the role of the bailiff that happen during the course of the next 3 to 4 years, the term of this budget. And if that were the case, do you anticipate that what I might call a cross-subsidy might continue within your to benefit your department if
Well,
that were the case?
The first thing I'd say is we can't call it a cross subsidy because the bailiff hosts a bailiff's dinner in his role as civic head of Jersey, much in the same way that the Speaker of the UK Parliament is seen as the first citizen in the UK and hosts dinners in the UK. The slight
but the difference is, are you saying that our Speaker would then...
That is the right thing for the bailiff to do in their role as civic head, and they have their budget and they fund those dinners. The question is, I suppose, if Jersey moved to a division of those responsibilities and changed who chaired the assembly, where would the function of the civic head sit? Because I think it could be argued that the function of the civic head could still host those dinners, but that's always been the biggest stumbling block about that division.
But the point you've made is the Speaker in the UK that would host a dinner or sort of gathering in the Speaker's house. So if the bailiff were no longer Speaker, are you suggesting the Speaker might take that role?
No, because you also have the head of state that hosts dinners for VIP dignitaries in the UK as well. So you can have a first citizen hosted dinner which the Speaker does, but you also have the head of state hosting one. And this is some of the glorious peculiarity of our constitution, that if we're going to change that role, we really need to work through.
I mean, I asked these only in terms of what the budget implications might be rather than anything else. So thank you for that, and I'll pass back over.
Thank you, Chair. I think in a similar line as well, it's what sort of overlap do you have in relation to some of those functions that you've just outlined around the teams with international development?
Well, we don't have any overlap with the functions of the work of Jersey Overseas Aid. And it's always been very important from Jersey's perspective to show the separation, and the decisions made by Overseas Aid, which are simply about aid and supporting the most vulnerable across the world, and the work that we do in external relations, which is more broadly about Jersey's history, culture and economy. And we have purposefully throughout the years kept those separate. Doesn't mean to say, for example, that when we have an inbound visit or an outbound visit, that the individuals interlocutors that we speak to are very interested in Jersey's aid programme. They are. Even yesterday, the ambassador was much taken by the work that Overseas Aid do around the Jersey cow and the ambassadorial nature of that project. And so that's something that we will help facilitate those conversations, but it will be separate in how it's funded and how decisions are made.
Okay, thank you. Could you please provide an outline of the purposes and priorities of the financial services teams?
So we've got the, as I said, we've got the financial crime strategy team, but we are, during the course of the end of this year and into next year, in order to make our savings and headcount reduction requirements, bringing those together. So the financial crime strategy team provides head of delegation function for Jersey and leads the Moneyval delegation and engagement with international bodies like FATF. It coordinates across all agencies, government, JFSC, FIU, ECU to ensure compliance with international standards. It develops and implements the jurisdictional financial crime strategy, develops policy and legislation to detect and prevent money laundering, terrorist financing and proliferation of financing, and it supports the financial services industry in Jersey in understanding and implementing international obligations. The financial services team develop and implement jurisdictional strategy for financial services. They develop and implement policy and legislation to support, protect and grow the financial services sector in Jersey. They engage with international standard setters and assessment bodies, including the OECD, the EU and the Commission. They represent Jersey's financial services sector on an international platform. They engage and support local trade associations and representative bodies, and they work closely with the JFSC to deliver appropriate regulation to support, protect and enhance the financial services sector in Jersey, something that's had quite a lot of coverage of late. And then we have the Financial Intelligence Unit, and that serves as Jersey's national intelligence agency and competent authority for the receipt, analysis and dissemination of intelligence developed from the submission of suspicious activity reports, known as SARS, and other reporting aligned with AML-CFT reporting obligations, countering threats to the island and internationally through coordination with other domestic and international competent authorities. They also engage in cross-agency programme of work on financial crime through representation on operational delivery groups, and they're a member of the Egmont Group.
Thank you, Minister, for that comprehensive account. You mentioned just now about the issues in relation to regulation that have been in the press recently. Do you envisage any changes to those priorities at all during the course of this term?
Well, as I've said, and as I said on the day that we published our Moneyval report, we are undertaking a strategic review of the regulatory environment right across Jersey, and it's too early to say what changes might arise from that at this stage, but I'm more than happy to keep the panel updated and informed as that review continues.
Do you have a time frame for when that review will be completed?
Some of the work will be undertaken locally, some of it will require international expertise and experiences or experience of other regulatory regimes. We are hoping to have the overall work completed by probably the second quarter of next year, but that's not to say that we don't expect some actions to be taken as we as that review is ongoing.
Okay, thank you. And finally from me, could you outline the usefulness of the proposed £40,000 expenditure for professional subscriptions? Could you just give us an outline of what it covers and how useful these subscriptions are?
Yes, so it's largely two things. It's our membership of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council. We have a programme with them whereby they support Jersey activity, which is really aimed at engaging with Commonwealth countries, either at business or government level. It also involves our membership for partnerships with OECD bodies.
Could you just give us a flavour of what we get for that?
In regard to the OECD, we get to, in effect, sit round the table and support policy development and have a voice at that table. So that membership is one thing, of course, but the value that we get from that membership is enormously enhanced by the quality of the people that we send to those organisations, which, for example, has allowed us to sit on the steering group for the Pillars 1 and 2 reform. It allows us to also chair a global forum work as well. So you pay to get through the door. It's the quality of the officials that we send that really give us influence.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions on that? No, thanks. Minister, there's a question that we'll probably follow up on, but I wanted to get some breakdown of the staff costs for financial crime and the financial intelligence unit, but I think that we could easily do that by correspondence if that's all right.
Yeah, that's probably
know-
probably easier unless Richard wants.
Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you. So I'll pass over to Deputy Andrews for the next set of questions.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Chair. The panel notes that there's about £330,000 worth of income that will be generated across the calendar year of 2025. And I want to know whether any consideration was given to broadening revenue streams for the Department of External Relations.
No, is the straightforward answer. The income is really money arising from the aerodrome licence fee, and that money is then used to provide the Office of the Director of Civil Aviation. And therefore that's what it does. I'm not sure what capacity there would be for us to increase that licence fee.
You've got a statutory obligation, Minister, to make sure that the DCA's office is appropriately resourced, which means that we have the DCA and team in place. And that's essentially what that Portsmouth Jersey money pays for. So there is no need to try to generate any more. It's simply paying for that function.
Okay, no, thank you very much. The panel notes as well, in the last government plan that was debated in December, the State Assembly approved additional expenditure of £134,000 for the overseas officers. And also there was an element of inflationary pressures to contend with, as well as a part-time employee being employed by the Department for External Relations. So I just wanted to know whether you could provide us with an update as to what has happened with that part-time employee in their new role for the Department for you.
Yes, of course. Do you want me to pick that one up? So it's a relatively junior role, but we identified a need to support particularly our French office, Beyond, with on-the-ground engagement here in Jersey. The office is 3 people now, but serving both Jersey and Guernsey. It's a huge amount of ground to cover, and they needed some additional support. So 0.5 was identified as being appropriate. It's actually 0.5 external relations, but also 0.5 economy as well. So the resources split across the 2 areas. I believe, Richard will speak to economy, but I think supporting on the cultural work that the department does. And it has been sufficient and well received by Beyond, I have to say.
Good. Speaking of working with other states, and in this case, obviously, there's been mention of Guernsey. The previous iteration of the Economic and International Affairs panel provided a recommendation for the Minister, or the then Minister, of External Relations about potentially conjoining with other bailiwicks to have an office headquartered in London, and I want to know whether that is still for consideration.
I suppose you're asking the wrong person, in that Jersey already has an office in London. We have spoken to our colleagues in both Guernsey and the Isle of Man. They are looking for their own office. Guernsey Finance, as I understand it, have a serviced office now, which is relatively new. They also have a desk in the London office with a Guernsey employee.
A hot desk, we provide a hot desk for a Guernsey employee to come into the office for a certain number of days per month.
Their office or
Our office, they come into the London office.
So that's a government official rather than
but I think
Guernsey finance official. But they continue to look.
Yes, they do. And Isle of Man, as you say, Minister, are also looking as well. I'm not sure there's appetite, certainly from Isle of Man's perspective, to have a joint office, but open to have conversations, of course.
Minister, I also wanted to touch on the subject of current and capital accounts. Now, in some states, they will provide information of that data, such as the UK, Germany, or France, for instance. And I wanted to know whether consideration would be given in future years, potentially, for the government to be expending on creating current and capital accounts for the island, so there's maybe an understanding of capital inflows and outflows our island jurisdiction?
I suppose some of that there is, and we're going to be cheeky now because we're going to ask Richard to make a commentary about something which he's not here for today, because it really, although the economic advisor sits in Richard's department, it's not in relation to financial services. They are and have been for some time considering what data would be useful. I know they did some work when we were starting to do the FTA programme, but I don't know if you wish to comment, Rich. You don't need to, because you're not here wearing that hat. But
So we have good data on the monetary flows to, inbound and outbound from Jersey for different countries globally, but they are just aggregate values. In terms of capital accounts, current accounts, that tends to be more of a sort of central bank issue. So we don't issue our own currency in the true sense of the word. We issue notes, but we don't have our own currency. We don't have our own central bank. So probably something from the Financial Stability Board perspective at some future point that they might care to take a look at, so that those responsibilities have been absorbed into the Fiscal Policy Panel. But it's a pretty extensive undertaking to start to do that, and considerable cost to be monitoring it in that way. But it typically starts with having your own currency and your own central bank.
Yeah, thank you very much. Minister, obviously, short term, it's a very much standardised government budget from an external relations perspective. But do you think in, say, the next decade, there would be any undertaking that potentially could be quite substantial for your department? And if so, what would that be?
I hope not, because if there is, it means there's been another tectonic shift, as we saw with Brexit, and it's important for us to remain stable and make the most, I think, of our current constitutional position. When it comes to the work of the financial services bit of the budget, then perhaps I hope the reverse, that we have created a competitiveness board, and you'll know that in the current budget we are proposing that in the future, not in 2025, but from 2026 onwards, that there will be money there allocated from Pillar 2 revenue to support that competitiveness work, and that will rightly need to focus on supporting financial services.
Yep. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in? Trying to read my colleagues' faces to see. I think we're okay for now.
Yeah.
If not, I just want to ask some more detail. You said something quite interesting about the London office and then a Guernsey officer having space in that office. Is that effectively just as, is that still keeping the separation between the two? It's not the beginning of emergence of the Channel Island office in London?
No, as the chief officer said, it's a hot desk, so they come and use a desk.
Yeah, but it's still distinctly Guernsey office.
They're doing Guernsey. That official is doing Guernsey work in the London office.
Yeah. Can I then ask, is there a difference in approach in terms of the European offering? Because we have the BION is obviously the Bureau et l'Anglo-Normand, and the CIBO is the Channel Island Brussels office. So that is very much a joint.
It is, yeah.
And is that partly due to the way that Europe maybe looks at the Channel Islands as a collective?
Sorry, Minister, you answer.
It's not a trick question, it's just to
You
understand.
go first and then I'll give the... Go on. So the chief officer set up that was her first job for Jersey, was setting up the London office.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think to a degree, I think it works well for the Channel Islands and the Crown dependencies across the piece to be representing ourselves together with international stakeholders. The decisions in respect of BION and CIBO were before my time, but I suspect that was a driver for it. And also, it makes economic sense as well to be splitting the cost, particularly when you're looking at platforms in Europe. The London office at the time, I don't think there was appetite actually from Guernsey to or the Isle of Man to to come in with us on that endeavour. That has changed.
Yeah.
It was fortuitous in many respects because it was before Brexit. But the office has kind of come into its own since that point.
Yeah.
And you're seeing now that Guernsey and indeed the Isle of Man are having to spend more time in
Yeah.
London
Okay.
to engage.
Are there times when, because there were clearly synergies, but there are also distinctions, and what we're seeing with Guernsey at the moment, they're taking a slightly, possibly different approach to their income tax, where they're looking to increase income tax maybe on a temporary basis, and that's not something Jersey's doing. I don't want to go down that road, but there are clearly, there's not always a joint, and that we can't always expect a joint policy to be put forward in terms of, taxation issues or whatever issues. So is it useful to have a distinct brand as well, do you think?
There are benefits from both. So remaining close even while and in conversation, even whilst we might be ploughing slightly different furrows, are important, because once we leave these islands, interlocutors have no qualms in asking us about Guernsey and the Isle of Man, as they've heard something about them, and as a Jersey minister you have to be able to speak positively on behalf of your colleagues, as they do from time to time on behalf of Jersey. But so understanding the difference is important, but also working together is important. So.
Yeah.
Isn't that contain a contradiction? We're talking about competition and cooperation simultaneously. Does that lead to problems?
Well, I had never found it really to lead to problems, but you are right. There is an element of competition, and but I think that's trumped by cooperation. The marketplace that we are looking to trade in is a big marketplace. We all have to show that we can meet the international standards and be responsive to international requirements. I think that by working together, the three of us, we end up with which is something which is greater than the sum of its parts.
Good.
Thank you. Just to follow on from that, would you consider there may be some areas of work where it would be useful to share resources to maximise the benefits for each of the islands?
Yeah, I mean, we see that.
And where would you do that?
Well, we see that in Brussels all the time. We see it in France all the time. And we also undertake a lot of engagement in the UK together. Party conferences, we are seeing ministers and MPs together. On the whole, Jersey and Guernsey rather than the three of us with that engagement, but certainly with UK ministers in London, we can be having engagement with the three of us.
Can I ask about the, if it's appropriate, but if you can answer it, in terms of the employment contracts with Beyond staff, do they work jointly for both islands? I mean, who are they answerable to in terms of their contracts?
Well, each of the offices have got slightly different structures because of where they are based.
Yeah. I mean, the same can go for SIBO, of course.
Yes.
I mean, as the Minister said, so you'll have private foundation, I think, in respect of SIBO. Yeah. Beyond has a sort of similar type arrangement. The London company is a limited company. They've been set up as employing entities, so the staff are employed through those companies, as it were. Each company has a board. And the board generally has, well, certainly in respect of Beyond SIBO, an equal split of Jersey and Guernsey representation, so that both islands have a equal say in the activities and the employment of the officers.
But it's distinct. So it was the Jersey London office that effectively are civil servants, officers working for government. Is that correct?
Well, but through the London company.
Yeah. Okay.
Because in order to work in the UK, you have to have an employing structure, and that employing structure is the London company.
Thank you. I've just got a question now about the Alliance Française, because there is an element, it's a small but I'm sure very important grant for them from your department. So we understand that a payment of £15,000 for the Alliance is anticipated.
Yep.
First of all, can you tell us, is that new, or have you always been given that?
Well,
Or a grant?
it's increased.
What was it before?
Was it
9,000.
Nine.
I'm thinking 9, okay. And could you just remind us, is that a composite grant that's funded with other departments as well?
So previously it was just external relations. The Alliance has needed additional funding. I think for a reasonable period of time, actually, they have been asking for additional support. So this year we looked at the budget again, and we have increased our funding to 15,000. And my understanding is economy for next year have also will also be funding to the tune of 15,000 as well.
And they probably have an arrangement with education, I imagine, but for services that are rendered, so to speak.
They do, but I'm not cited on the quantum of that.
Could you just tell us, in terms of the value that the Alliance provide to you, is that £15,000 good value for money? Do you think?
Yes, I do, absolutely. Otherwise, we wouldn't have. We wouldn't.
I was hoping that'd be the answer. It'd be awkward if it wasn't.
Absolutely.
And, and
Well, I didn't know whether you were asking from an operational perspective or just supporting.
Well, from a ministerial point of view, is it also?
From a ministerial perspective, support for the work of the Alliance and us having such a thriving Alliance here in Jersey is a very positive thing. From an operational perspective, I don't really get involved in looking at that budget and where they spend it, but it is a good thing from a governmental perspective.
I mean, and the next question is it enough? And maybe it's not something you can or will answer, but is it enough? Does government give enough to the Alliance Française, given what they give back potentially to government and the wider community?
Well, my understanding is, having met with the Alliance on I think at least one formal occasion, if not more, that the increased budget from both our budget and from the economy budget will support them to continue trading and doing what they want to do. If you ask them a totally different question of, if the sky was the limit, what would you do, then obviously I suspect they'd come back for more.
Thank you. Okay. And the next question, we're going to move on to a slightly different area. So it is, we've noted that sorry, I should have asked, were you okay to? Yeah. I know I'm the chair, but I do like to be inclusive. The panel has noted that the budget proposes an approval for an updated consolidated policy for the application of the strategic reserve, which includes confirmation of the provisions of states' contribution to the Banking Depositors Compensation Scheme, if necessary. So can you outline what consideration is being given to using other funds or mechanisms for the funding of the scheme in the future, if required? Does that make sense? It's about the...
Yes, I mean, it is only a restating of the existing position. I know that you've asked questions about it, but that is what it is. So, in effect, it's no change. It's the fact that we're stating the use of the strategic reserve.
Just bringing the policy all together.
That we're bringing it all together to make it, I suppose, clearer. So there is no, there's no change in that regard. Of course, you will know from your other work that the change really is around, and we've just gone out to consultation, is the resolution authority, which gets ahead of the need to provide depositor compensation, because it seeks to mean that firstly, banks don't need to wind up, but if they do need to wind up, you've got a proper and good thorough process in place.
So in terms of the funding that's available for that, it's up to £100 million. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And that's remained fixed since 2009.
Since the inception of the law, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the global figure which would be compensated, and then there's
it's the figure that can be called upon.
Yeah.
at the point of the failure of the bank. It's not saying that's the only amount that will be compensatable,
Yeah.
but it's the figure that will be called upon, which is why we're trying to deliver the new resolution authority to get ahead of that.
Okay. Can we look at the figure? I mean, we've asked this question in a different context before, but the overall amounts that are being safeguarded for deposits hasn't gone up since that introduction either. I don't want to ask the question we've asked before about why not, because I think you've answered that. But if there were to be a proposal to increase that either in this term, if there were an amendment forthcoming, or if there was in fact a government policy in the future to do that, where would the money come from that? Is it something that could be delivered?
Well, and this is part of the issue, that you can't just say you're going to do one thing without thinking about the implications of the rest of the scheme. I think that the chair of the compensation board themselves say that, okay, whilst it's something that could be looked at, they take the view that it really shouldn't be looked at before 2026, when we've got the resolution authority up and running, and you've got the depositor compensation scheme within that new resolution authority. And they are the experts in this area, albeit they recognise it's a governmental decision, but their advice would be that you don't look at that until any earlier than 2026.
Jack, can I just ask, does the presence of the resolution authority first reduce the financial risks to the island around how it might? So is that the rationale behind why
That's
you want
correct,
to?
yeah.
And so, thank you. So, in terms of the progress of the transfer of responsibility for the scheme to the new resolution authority, could you just tell us how is that going, and what's the timeline for it?
We're just about to. I've signed the MD, publish the legislation for consultation.
Okay. And when do you think that will be concluded?
I think it depends on the feedback that comes through consultation. If it's relatively easily accepted, then I think it's something that will be coming to the Assembly in the early part of next year. If there's quite comprehensive feedback that needs to mean fundamental rewriting of the draft legislation, it's going to be much deeper into 2025.
Okay. But next year sometime, hopefully
Earlier part of next year, I'd say by spring next year, we should have that lodged, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Right, I think that's all for now. I'll pass to Deputy Southern for his question, which will be 13 on his order paper.
Might be. Yeah, yes, it is. It is. So we note financial services looking for £700,000 of savings. What risk assessment of those savings has been undertaken?
When you say risk assessment, could you, in what way are you asking that question?
I think it's to do with, are there any counterfactuals, are there any downsides to the savings, or the cuts, as some people might call them, that are being made? Are there any negatives that need to be managed or mitigated?
Will there be, effectively, a reduction in grant payments, or what will the role of staff play in?
So the biggest element of the saving is the reduction in the base grant to Jersey Finance Limited of 429,000. And then, as I said, the other element of savings will be delivered by the restructuring that's not sure if it's ongoing or completed, but it's in that process, and so we'll make those savings. So we'll seek to provide a similar, as much as we can, service, but with fewer staff, in line with the government's diktat to prioritise, so that more money can be spent and retained on frontline services. And we'll continue to work with Jersey Finance to ensure that they can manage their budget as efficiently as possible, but it will have implications because they'll have less money to spend.
And fewer staff, critically.
Minister, if I might
Yes,
just
sorry, go
add,
on, yeah.
just on the basis of the public record, the restructuring is complete.
Okay,
So
fine, yeah.
there's no further uncertainty to colleagues. In terms of the background, the journey we've been on, the Financial Crime Strategy team was formed in the preparations for Moneyval. Having completed Moneyval successfully and published the report earlier this year, we're able to stand that resource down from I suppose, a war footing in one context to something that beats a much steadier tempo over the years ahead and leading up to the next Moneyval assessment. So a couple of colleagues who were on fixed-term contracts, those contracts expired as the Moneyval programme came to a close earlier this year, and we will move to a different pace going forwards.
Can I just ask one thing? Does that mean that your baseline whole-time equivalent establishment remains the same, or has it increased or reduced as a result?
So the fixed headcount will remain the same. We have lost 2 fixed-term contractors earlier in the year. So that's the 2 full-time equivalents that are mentioned, I think, in the letter. Yeah.
Thank you.
So there are no redundancies.
And just to remind ourselves, so when we talk about the grant to Jersey Finance, they're a separate entity anyway, so they do get money from other sources.
They do.
From
They
subscriptions.
raise about £900,000 or so a year of income from their members, both by voluntary membership and through some commercial activities. For example, members may sponsor certain Jersey Finance events, either in the UK or internationally.
Yeah, okay. And, do you have any other questions, Deputy Sutherland?
Okay, so which grants are anticipated to be reduced on both the External Relations and the Financial Services Ministry? Where's those changes occurring?
The we've just talked about the grant to JFL. That's the 429. You will be reducing the grant to the SIBO Brussels office. That's arising out of a change of structuring there, which means that we don't need to pass as much money to them, because it's the grant that provides the funding for the office to operate, and we'll retain that, and that will be banked as a saving.
But the headcount at SIBO is staying the same.
It is, yeah.
Are there any other changes in any of the other offices that we need to know about, that are reductions in funding? No. Okay. All right. I think. Thank you, Deputy. So yeah, that's all of the questions in that section. So I'm going to pass back over to Deputy. I think we've asked that question, haven't we?
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chair. The Chief Minister has indicated that growth bids have been reduced by 20%. Can you tell us how this has impacted upon the Ministry's aspirations?
So there's been a reduction of the growth bids in 2024, so that's in year, so growth monies. So like every other department that's had to take that cut, you're just having to do slightly less of what you were proposing to increase doing, rather than have all of that new money.
Just for the benefit of the public, Minister, could you say what you had intended to do before?
Well, I mean, I basically say, well, you do as much as you can with the money that you've got of what it was that we initially wanted to do. You just won't quite do as much. So do you want to talk about the...
Well, I mean, in respect to the SIBO grant, which the Minister referenced before, we are finding the 20% entirely from SIBO. So the growth funding, I think, was 134,000 that we received in 2024, and we're finding 27,000 from SIBO. That's largely coming from a change in status of the office, which actually means that the office really can continue doing what it was doing before. It's able to operate on a more efficient footing by virtue of the legislative changes in Brussels, rather than us having to direct the office to do less of the very important business that it does in Brussels. So in effect, the efficiency saving for external relations in respect to the overseas offices is not going to affect the the operation or the resourcing.
No, it was
on
quite
that platform.
fortuitous then.
Quite fortuitous, yes, indeed. That it was, that it's come about and we've implemented it successfully. Of course, that's just external relations.
Do you want to talk about FS?
Yeah, there was a modest amount of growth for Jersey Finance that had been agreed previously in government plan, I think 2023, that would have taken effect in 24. That figure was cut by the 20%. I'm trying to remember the number off the top of my head, but I think the 20% saving was somewhere in the order of 100 to 150,000 pounds of saving. But we can come back on that for a specific number, but it was roughly
Please,
in
if
that
you could.
range.
Thank you, Richard, thank you.
Can I just jump in there? So in terms of because we're talking about cuts and growth at the same time effectively, and I think just certainly it would be helpful to know if we could talk about an effective saving rate. So is the global saving rate for your departments 20%, or is it less than that because you've got successful growth bids on top of after you've made the 20%?
So there's no growth in 2025.
Nothing.
Certainly for the financial services part of the portfolio.
Nothing for ER, no, we have no further growth.
That's effectively a 20% cut
on
of
the
your
growth that we got.
on the growth. Yeah. Okay,
we
that makes
also,
sense. Yeah.
I think it's important to note that we also had some growth that was awarded in 2022 in respect of sanctions work, international compliance. That growth comes to an end as at the end of this year. We are not getting that back. However, the post is still needed because the global situation unfortunately has not got any better. In fact, it seems to be getting worse. So we are also trying to absorb that cost within the overall budget for the department too.
Can I just ask, in terms of how you're going to achieve that 20%, is that within year or is that spread over the next 2 years where there is no growth in the department?
It's annually, so we will. It's every year.
Okay.
Yes, but you've made the
In terms of 20%.
you've made the 20% cut to growth money through the CBO.
Yes.
That doesn't come back in 25, 26 or 27. It's taken out
Yeah.
It's permanently
So
gone.
you will have
Yeah.
a 20% reduction.
Yes.
on the growth.
Yeah, on the growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. But are you anticipating growth in 2025?
No.
No.
So where would you
So
get
in
that money?
2025, like all central departments, we are being asked to take our share of the 15 million,
Yep.
is it worth of savings on how we recruit and the people that we employ, tied with the recruitment freeze. And that's where Chief Officer's talking about we will have to do that, but at the same time we will have to replace somebody that we won't then have funding for. But it you know, I'm a great believer that departments should, and all departments obviously aren't, but should be subject to similar disciplines. But this discipline arises out of largely two things: investing in our people through the pay rises and providing more funding for health.
And can I just check, do the same principles apply to financial services in the way that they apply to external relations?
In regard to
The way in which growth and efficiency is going to be addressed?
yes, they're global targets for the non-frontline departments.
Can I ask, if you don't mind, Deputy, so the reason I was looking at the financial crime and financial intelligence unit stats earlier, and to follow up on probably a written question, so to speak, if you have a department which is quite heavy in terms of the staffing costs, so the budget is taken up by vast majority of staff costs, then that effectively isn't protected from growth, because that works, the staff costs are immune from the top slicing, the 20% saving on growth. Is that correct? Because they'll be subject to pay negotiation commitments.
Well, we've got to just remind, the 20% was the 20% of growth monies that were given in 2024. So that's where the 20% is. In 2025, those central departments that aren't frontline have been asked to take their share of the 10 million, increased 10 million of savings, and on top of that, the extra 15 million from staff savings.
Okay. But
There's a general downward pressure towards headcount in
yeah.
frontline departments. So departments such as financial services, financial crime, and the financial intelligence unit will face that same downward pressure. So we're able to manage that dynamically, certainly going into 2025, and we expect in 2026 as well. The financial intelligence unit is something that we have invested in of late, and now needs a period of consolidation as a standalone authority once the legislation is passed.
In terms of going back to the question that Deputy Southern was asking earlier about the risks, does the threat of reductions in headcount, is that having a toll or an impact on the stress levels of staff currently in your departments? You can only speak for your own departments. Did the ones who are likely to be made redundant or restructured in different positions, either now or in the future, are they being engaged in that conversation? Are they aware of the changes that may be happening to them?
Yeah, that's why I was cautious about whether it was completed or not in what I was going to say in the public domain, because there is engagement that it's ongoing, as Chief Officer just said. It has been completed. There was always, we had a core team of people that were delivering what was an excellent result in Manival for Jersey, and there was always going to be that really strong passion for the shared mission. Once that shared mission is completed, there are people on fixed-term contracts whose contract's going to come to an end, and there's always going to be a breaking up of that team, which is not straightforward for staff. We recognise that. It has, though, allowed us to move forward and restructure and do all of the things that we've been asked to do from a central corporate perspective.
And is there no risk contained in that you're a highly skilled team with rare skills? There's no risk that you're a cohort of your workers up and leave?
Well, there's always a risk. I mean, this is the only certain thing about an island community. People come and people go. We live with that every day. Great staff move on for all sorts of personal reasons and opportunities elsewhere, or bigger pay packets in the private sector. But my experience has always been, as great staff move on, others suddenly see the light of day and want to get out of the private sector and want to give something back to their community. And we have to let people go in that way.
Could I frame it a little bit more in terms of, do you think there is a consequential impact in relation to the plan that you've put together to address the efficiency programme?
Whenever you're having to try and deliver your priorities for less money than you might have thought you would have, or you might ideally like, that presents challenges. But I have to put those challenges against the challenges of constituents telling me they've had to wait 4 years for a cataract operation. And when I make that judgment, yes, my departments, I think, together with Deputy Morels, are at the heart of growing the economy. And if we don't get it right, and if we don't invest, then we'll have a declining economy, which ultimately has a knock-on effect to my constituent who's having to wait for 4 years for a cataract operation as well. But at this point, I think that's the right decision and the right balance to make.
Was there ever a conversation had at council about your two departments being exempt, exactly for the reason you've outlined? Because it could be short-sighted. Talking about cataracts, this could be political short-sightedness.
Could be. I mean, yes, there were. I made the case that we could have more money, but I live with the settlement that I've got, as I say, knowing that in the financial services bit of my department, there is money allocated in 2026 to do the competitiveness work, which will really support the work that that we want to do in FS.
I just wanted to drill a bit more around the resource, around staffing. Is one of the consequential impacts that as activity and as the work progresses, that you won't have the workforce available to you to deliver the kind of agenda that you're pursuing, and that will increase the cost base in each of the departments because of the need to recruit additional capability and additional capacity. I take Richard's point about, you're scaling, but I think, Minister, what you're saying is there is only so much we can do with so much money. So there seems to be a tension in that, and I think it would be helpful for us to understand if the anticipation includes having to recruit additional staff in order to manage the workload over the next 2 years.
Well, we are going through, conscious that we've got the Treasury Minister with us, said much, right? The government is seeking to prioritise where it spends its money. But overall, the budget has not reduced between 24 and 25. The budget is increased. And it's increased for the very reasons that I've kept articulating: investment in people and provision of health services. That's why it's increased.
Investment in people with a wage freeze.
There hasn't been a right wage
They've
freeze.
had a pay rise.
They've had a pay rise.
But there's
That wasn't in the budget, and so that
yeah.
continues rolling.
3%
That
rise.
cost rolls forward.
But there is a
But that's a choice to make. Investing in our
Recruitment.
people. That's
I mean, can I ask a quick? So, in terms of I think the risk from a staffing point of view is that in order to meet the increasing staff wages, that you reduce headcount. One of the things we hear, I think, as constituency reps or politicians generally across the board, is that there's a risk that we hear of high-level redundancies being made with long-serving staff, and then they may find themselves coming back as consultants in whichever department, partly because they can't work for a year in the department, I think. So, and is there a risk that actually, if you cut staff numbers too far, that actually you just need to get them back via another means, and that it's not really a savings in real terms?
Well, I think that the target is, rather than saying target X number of headcount reductions, it's being done by an amount of money. So achieve this amount of saving, and it may be one department can achieve that amount of saving by losing one manager, and often people do say we will take out that managerial job, and that just gets adopted into everybody else's, and you don't replace that person. So it's not, well, I mean, what we have said we'll focus on is the kind of unnecessary layers of management which have kind of crept in some places, rather than people on the front line providing frontline services.
But in terms of the use of short-term contracts and getting consultants in, is that something that which is relevant to your department? Is that something that you don't think you'll necessarily need?
well, it's in the external relations. It's not an operating model that we have, but in financial services, we've always found it incredibly useful to bring in largely people from industry on secondment or consultancy to do specific pieces of work. And what we're in the situation now where we have to make the case for each of those pieces of work discreetly and go through a new process. That's just how it is, to ensure that right across the board we are managing that spend on consultants.
And I think I'd like to stress on that as well, the support that we have from the financial services industry more widely. So when we do go out and look for secondees, if we bring a secondee in for a 6-month block of work, they come in and are seconded at the same level as our own staff in terms of pay. So the cost to us is the same as we would have for paying somebody on the payroll for that period. They're not coming in at an inflated day rate or charge out rate from that firm. So that is a huge benefit for us, to bring in somebody with contemporary knowledge in a particular matter, and then go back out to that firm once the work is completed. So some of our budget is deployed towards that more flexible model as well.
Okay.
Can you tell us what percentage of the budget is deployed for that purpose?
There's about 10% of the financial services and financial crime pay bill that gives us that flexibility to bring people in on shorter term engagements.
And will that be charged against a vacancy, or is that money that's just set aside?
It's just money that's set aside, yeah. We don't hold vacancies against it. But as I say, if they do come in, they're paid the substantive rate of the role, not a charge out rate from the firm that they are coming to us from.
Okay.
We're probably quite unique in that
I think so,
model
yeah.
across
Yeah,
government.
we're fortunate with the support we have from industry.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you. The panel understands there's an anticipated saving in 2025 of £130,000 in implementation of digital visitor economy and elite sports strategies. Can you please inform us as to what part of those strategies will not be progressing?
Well, I'd like to, but obviously I can't because it's not within my remit. So it's the other bit of the economy but department that you'll need to ask Deputy Morell about.
Okay, we can redirect.
I'll make a note of that one for
I'm not sure why
Deputy
that's on our
Morell's hearing.
paper.
So, do your savings relate to cutting of programmes, reducing the scope of programmes, or achieving the aspirations within reduced budgets?
So there's a small part of the external relations budget, which is a cut to programmes. What do you remind me what you call it? You call it the bilateral programme fund, which.
Yeah, it doesn't tell us much. What does that mean?
So this was some money that we put aside in the budget to support collaboration with other bits of government or ALOs or indeed third sector teams that wanted to work with us to deliver aims in support of good international relations or stronger international relations. So things like we had an event when CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, was extended to us. So we had an event that we co-hosted and we supported through that. It wouldn't normally come out of the external relations budget, but it's that sort of thing that the fund supports. We did some work with Durrell as well, supporting some inbound visits of experts coming over to Jersey and vice versa. That is not something that will be in place longer term. That's where I've had to make a saving.
Okay.
Are you able to give us, separately a list of where you're reducing the scope or you're actually just stopping doing things? That would be really helpful.
So of course, with external relations, it's relatively simple. It's a bilateral programme fund. I'm cutting the travel budget a little bit, and then there's some savings around staff, which tends to be around vacancy management, rather than making staff redundant or losing vacant posts. But I will of course come back with detail on that.
Thank you. And in relation to financial services?
We can come back with sort of more detail, but I think dynamically we're meeting. We don't have a special fund, so the budget's relatively straightforward. There's an element of staff costs, there's the grant to Jersey Finance, and then some non-staff cost components. The target savings we've had it's a long-standing efficiencies target that departments have had to take that we deliver to dynamically each year. Maybe by deferring some work, it's maybe by value management in terms of contractual relationships. It may be sort of dipping for the line in terms of reduced travel spend towards a year end. On the staff side, we're happy that we can live within our means on the staffing and ensure that just by prioritisation of the workload ruthlessly, that we ensure our statutory requirements are met, and it's the discretionary work programme that would be deferred if necessary. And then the grant to Jersey Finance, I think we've covered.
Yes.
That's generally given out much earlier in the year, but there's clarity for Jersey Finance of the budget that they'll be working to in 2025, provided the government plan or the budget, should I say, is passed. Should there be amendments to the budget, then they would have to adjust accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're virtually at the end. Are you okay if we just ask the last question? And I'm looking at this thinking it could easily be a question for economic development, but it's a generic one, so it could well be. If you can answer it for your department as well.
Yeah.
We'll
It's
see.
in regards to ALOs and the uncertainty that those ALOs face when the States Assembly is debating budgets. It seems to be year on year that the States Assembly is debating those budgets. And of course, there is concerns, say if we're looking at, say, Jersey Finance, they might want to do something in particular, but if there is no certainty in the future that there will be a budget agreed for them, do you believe there is potentially a better, sustainable way of working with the ALOs compared to what is already in place?
It's a good question, which isn't solved by the way that we work with ALOs. It would only be solved by returning to a more than 1 year budget process, because every single organisation that we support, the agreement for our budget and spend is only annually, and it's towards the end of the year for spend that starts on the 1st of January. Whilst you have an annual budget process, we tried an MTFP, which was a 3-year process. People felt that was too much of a straitjacket. When I was sitting in the role of the minister here to my right now, I proposed a 2-year and 2-year budgeting process, so you could try and align it with elections, so you didn't feel you had a straitjacket, but you could have more certainty about the 2 years in a row. I think that there would be continued value in us considering that approach.
And can I just ask, in terms of when the grants are paid, did you say, are they paid in tranches, or are they paid in one lump sum for the year, and when are they paid?
So they're currently paid in tranches. There's quite a governance process to go through. What Chief Officer in relation to JFL is doing is trying to shorten that process so that they have certainty of budget right at the start of the year, which will help some way to that, but it doesn't go the whole way.
And in terms of the delivery of so they might have certainty, but when do they get the money in their accounts?
So what we aim for as a department is to get the money out in January and July, so the 2 6-monthly instalments. That's been predicated on information being provided by the arm's length organisation that's pertinent to that point of the calendar. So, for example, they won't have signed off the previous year's annual accounts at that point, but they will have signed those off by the July grant payment. So I have a series of requirements that are pertinent to that point of the year. If they give us that information, then the grant's paid out. We are looking to slim that further to see if we can make those sort of post conditions as opposed to preconditions, so that the money can even get out the door earlier in January than it does at the moment. The benefit to the government is that reduces the amount of reserves that the ALO might otherwise need to hold on its balance sheet to cover for cash flow.
And so the message is that you're looking to make sure that all governments that is required is justified, proportionate and streamlined where possible.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, and this doesn't just apply to your department, but that there are ALOs that government deals with across the board which are well established, that are known, and they're it's largely business as usual, and so that sounds reasonable. Is that what we would chime with you?
That's certainly what we're aiming for. The Department for the Economy, we give out a number of grants: Jersey Finance, Visit Jersey, Jersey Business, Digital Jersey, Jersey Heritage, Art House Jersey. There's some regulators like the Data Protection Authority. So there's a lot goes out the door. Very different circumstances for each of those organisations and different obligations that are placed upon them. But the sooner the information that's required for the January payment comes in, the quicker we can get the money out of the door to them, and the less cash flow reserves they need to be sitting on.
Thank you. That's a theme that comes up with our other departments, so thank you for that. Any further questions? No. Minister and your team, can I say thank you? Sorry we've overrun slightly, but I think we've kept within more or less the window. Any questions for us?